Welcome back to another explainer. You know the drill. We take dense, complex source material and we break it down visually. Today, we're diving straight into the fascinating evolution of a psychological theory known as TROM, the resolution of mind. It's a wild journey. We're talking decades of history, moving from this incredibly dense, scattered set of notes all the way into the streamlined, accessible 2026 New View edition.
So, let's just jump right into this incredibly provocative question, because it really sits at the heart of the whole philosophy we're unpacking today. Think about it. Imagine if every struggle, every single mental block, every past trauma wasn't actually some permanent scar hardwired into your brain. What if it was simply a failure of a specific mental postulate, a failed conviction that you can literally just rewrite? That is the bold promise we're looking at here. To get there, here's our roadmap for today's explainer. We'll start with the resolution of mind, move into postulates and the trap, then the to-know package, deciphering Dennis Stevens, and finally, TROM for the masses.
Okay, Section 1, the resolution of mind. Let's understand the core framework of TROM.
The absolute crucial point here is that TROM offers this really specific framework where the secret to vanishing mental mass, just getting rid of it entirely, is simply reevaluating its importance to your present-time reality. The text makes a fascinating argument. It basically says, as long as a mental mass, like a bad memory or trauma, is considered important, you are actively keeping it in existence. If you try to fight it or, push it away with force, you're actually validating its importance, which only makes it stick around longer. The only way out is to deliberately devalue it.
And I love how the founder, Dennis Stevens, uniquely defines insanity here. He doesn't look at it as a medical condition. No, to him, it's a pure breakdown in logic. He roots TROM really deeply in the algebra of logic, specifically Boolean algebra. He argues that the entire foundation of science rests on the idea that a thing cannot both exist and not exist at the very same time. When a human mind is forced into a corner and accepts that exact contradiction, that is when it fractures.
Right. Let's move on to Section 2, postulates and the traps, and see how the mind traps itself in these unerasable goals. According to the text, our minds literally trap themselves through the mechanics of games play. In this view, life is just a series of games, and games are simply contests in conviction. When your conviction, what TROM calls your postulate, fails against someone else's, you experience an overwhelm. Now, if you are the one doing the overwhelming, it's called an overt act. But if you are the one being overwhelmed, it acts as a motivator. It's this constant, relentless crashing of opposing convictions that creates the trap we get stuck in. Which brings us to the actual structural anatomy of what other therapies might call an engram or the reactive mind. But TROM treats it purely as a malleable configuration of conflicting postulates. They call it the twin insanity point mass, or TIP. It's not permanent mass, it's generated mass. Think of it like mental putty. When two opposing goals crash together, they form this sticky, dense ridge of energy right there in your mind. Moving to Section 3, the to-know package. Let's look at the fundamental goals package of the universe.
The text emphasizes that every single minor, complex purpose you have in life is actually just a junior offshoot of one inescapable foundational desire to know. You might think your goal is to be wealthy, right? Or to avoid a certain person, or to find love. But TROM categorizes absolutely all of these as junior packages. They're simply complex, layered methods of trying to know or trying not to know. The sneaky trick of the mind is that these junior packages create a total illusion of independence, which keeps you trapped deep in the weeds.
So how do we get out? Well, through these specific solo therapy steps, TROM claims a person can progressively free themselves from the entrapment of all those junior packages. First, you have to look right at the mental mass and acknowledge that, yep, you currently find it important. Second, and this is absolutely key, resist the urge to fight it. Third, you deliberately assign it the consideration of unimportance. And finally, because its whole existence relied on your conviction that it mattered, it just vanishes. Imagine applying that exact sequence the very next time you feel a sudden mental block.
Okay, Section 4, deciphering Dennis Stevens. Let's talk about the man behind the dense, chronological notes.
Dennis Stevens was this exhaustive, almost relentless researcher. He spent from 1978 until his death in 1994 compiling all these theories into a massive, heavily detailed body of work. He was obsessed, in a good way, with the exact logic of the mind, and he rigorously tested these upper-level procedures on himself. But because he was primarily a researcher, he recorded his findings strictly chronologically, literally just as he discovered them.
Tracing the timeline here shows just how long this material remained obscured and really difficult to navigate formats. He wrote the original manual back in '78 and kept adding audio lectures deep into the '90s, right up until he passed away in 1994. For a long time, if you wanted to learn Trom, you had to sift through this totally raw, unedited archive. It wasn't until Roger Tandry stepped in with the 2023 and 2025 editions that the text finally got modernized, and that directly paved the way for the definitive New View 2026 edition, which is an absolute game-changer.
Because, honestly, looking at this original table of contents, you can practically feel the headache beginners must have had just trying to figure out where on earth to start. You've got highly advanced philosophical addendums stacked right on top of basic practical theory. Why? Simply because that's the exact chronological order Stevens wrote them in. There was absolutely zero gentle on-ramp for a newcomer.
Stevens totally knew the immense value of his work, but his scattered notes left a huge practical problem for any future students trying to actually apply the therapy. He firmly believed this was a profound, workable route out of the mind's traps, but passing away when he did left his life's work as this brilliant but incredibly messy puzzle.
Which brings us nicely to Section 5, Tendrom for the Masses. Roger Tandry's mission to reorganize and clarify.
Tandry realized that Trom was just far too valuable to leave in the dark, so he initiated this really inspiring modern campaign to bring these teachings to the public, entirely for free. Calling it DIY Salvation, he used platforms like YouTube and launched the Better Trom initiative. His goal wasn't to change the underlying technology, not at all. He just wanted to act as the editor that Dennis Steffens never had.
So Tandry fundamentally shifted the book from that raw archive into a logical, step-by-step tool. Building heavily on his 2025 foundation, this whole process of logic synthesis finally culminated in the New View 2026 edition. He completely restructured the final book. Now, the simpler theory actually comes first. He integrated helpful illustrations, a layman-friendly glossary, and even a Trom 101 chapter just to tear down those massive barriers to entry.
And this leaves us with such a beautiful meta-narrative, doesn't it? The disorganized Manual of Mind Resolution had to undergo its very own process of logical resolution to become useful. The very tool promising to untangle the messy, conflicting postulates of the human mind was itself, for decades, a tangled, confusing mess. By logically reordering the text, Tandry actually resolved Trom.
So, I'll leave you with a fascinating final thought. Now that Trom's complex map of the mind has finally been made accessible, are you ready to examine the postulates trapping your own? If all our failures and overwhelming mental masses are really just outdated convictions waiting to be devalued, the key to the trap might literally be right in our own hands. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I really encourage you to reflect on what convictions might be quietly running your own games. See you next time.